eagle and the dragon are at it again. The rift is back, and in a series of tweets beginning on Sunday, President Donald Trump warned tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods could rise to 25% later this week. That's on Friday. Following the high tariffs China has paid to the US for the past 10 months, the Donald Trump administration says it's been responsible for America's great economic results. As a repercussion, China is considering a move to cancel its trade talks with the United States, for which the Vice Premier of China was supposed to reach Washington with a 100-people delegation. Remember, the trade war began in early 2018 when the United States started a regime of steep tariffs in steel and aluminum in a move that was widely seen as protectionist. The tariffs were much steeper than what the markets had anticipated. The last round of the trade war spared India's external finances. Now, when the rupee has recovered, could it come under a fresh attack? How will it impact the current account deficit? The escalation of the US-China trade war and what it means for Indian economy, the geopolitics, the new government is what we're going to be discussing on this leg of the India development debate. So let's get straight down to it. Joining me on the show, Meera Shankar, the former diplomat to the United States, Ajay Dua, the former secretary of the DIPP, Pankaj Mohindru, the national president of the Indian Cellular Association, and Maithili Busnarwat, our consulting editor at ET Now. Thank you very much for all of you joining us here. Ambassador Shankar, I'm going to begin with you. It seems to be the era of protectionism. Every country has decided for its own interest, wants to look inwards. The big question is, with what Donald Trump has announced on Sunday, followed it up with a new tweet today saying no more will it be sparing China, that it wants to bring it all down. What do you think the repercussions are going to be for India at large? Should we see this as a opportunity for the Indian economy, or should it be seen as something that's going to hurt the economy, is going to hurt the Indian currency once again?
Well, firstly, I think we have to wait and see if the action actually materializes or is being used more as a lever to push the trade negotiations which the US and China have been having. Because the rhetoric on those trade negotiations in recent months has been very conciliatory from the US, and this is a sharp shift in that rhetoric. Indeed, a few weeks ago we were hearing they are very close to a trade deal. This is probably going to be the last round of talks where things are going to be clinched. So we have to wait and see. I mean, is Trump's threat intended to be leveraged to expedite the talks to a conclusion, or is it really going to kick in? Now, granted that it kicks in, I don't see it affecting India negatively. It would certainly impact China's exports to the US, but India would not be impacted directly, and indeed might have an opportunity to export to the US. But the overall slowdown in the global economy flowing from these trade tensions might impact us.
Okay, that's a very valid point you made, that is Donald Trump going to go through with this, or is this being seen as a way to get China to the negotiating table with an edge? Ajay Dua, if I could come to you, Ambassador Shankar, they're raising a valid point that, it's going to hurt China a lot more than it's going to hurt India. But India will have to be vigilant. It's election season. You could see these new tariffs coming in as early as Friday. The new government has to come in, and you know how the Indian bureaucracy, you more than anyone better knows how the Indian bureaucracy works. India will have to be vigilant and make sure it's not treated as a dumping ground. Would you agree with that view? And is it necessary that even if there is a model code of conduct, till we don't know who the new government is, this is watched out very closely and proactive steps are taken?
Nantara, I think the impact of the US-China trade, call it a trade war or call it a kind of the tension which is been exasperated by President Trump's rhetoric of yesterday, is not going to be very badly impacted or favorably impacted by this particular action. What is going to be impacting us is some of the bilateral actions which the US has threatened to be imposed or made effective on India. First of it, which you refer to also, is taking away an access which was given to Indian products coming from many other emerging markets, developing countries as the US calls, was the scheme of generalized system of preferences. The US had put us on notice 3 months ago that effective from early May, it will be withdrawing this preference to India. Luckily, it is applicable to only about $6 billion of Indian exports to the US, but for those impacted in India, the industries which had got used to it, the exporters who had got kind of were dependent upon this incentive, this could hurt quite a bit. The fact of the matter is that actually the deadline for it lapsed on the 2nd of May. The US President did not sign that proclamation, which we understand has been submitted to him by the US Commerce Department. We hope this good sense continues to prevail and the US President does not actually bring that threat into force. Not because the US cannot do it. This was a unilateral concession given to India, so it can be also withdrawn, and India probably has no court of no remedial option in case the US decides to go ahead. The second one is the US has also imposed upon us, and it's become effective, is the sanction on Iran. We are one of the 8 countries upon whom this sanction on trade with Iran has been imposed, and as we all know, India has a unique relationship with Iran with respect to its hydrocarbon imports. For years together, we've been decades together.
I will get to Iran in just a bit. Dr. Dua, I'm going to get to Iran in just a bit, because on the flip side, we also talk about how we have been reducing our dependency on oil when it comes to Iran. But on the other hand, should the United States even be in a position to tell India what its relations should be with Iran, which you have described as to be unique? I'm going to come back to that point in just a bit. But if I could bring Maitri Bustermath into this conversation. Maitri, one of the biggest fears, and maybe what you saw across the global markets today, was the fear that maybe Donald Trump will act on it. And if he does act on it, what is it going to mean for global growth? The projections that you have currently, for example, from the IMF, from the World Bank, which you did see being revised downwards, did not include higher tariff regime. It did not include escalated trade war between China and the US, which could then engulf other emerging economies like India. It is looking like a possibility at the moment. Where is this going to leave global growth? Obviously, India cannot be isolated from it. And the other big question then is, what is the WTO doing? Do we need to discuss the relevance of the WTO?
Well, let me address the second question first, Nayantara. The WTO has virtually become quite redundant. In fact, the way Trump has dismissed the WTO virtually is that the WTO is not going anywhere. In fact, we've not seen multilateral trade is virtually on the back burner, and the US is increasingly negotiating bilateral deals because it knows that in a bilateral deal it has the upper hand. So we've seen it redraw, regional trade agreements. We've seen the US dictate terms to even its closest allies, Canada and Mexico. So as far as protectionism is concerned, it's very much on the rise, primarily led by the US. So the WTO is now become a completely toothless tiger. As to your first question, yes, the IMF has already warned that if we do have a global trade war, it will weaken global growth even more so. But I'm just hoping, and I think most of the world is, that this is basically bluster from President Trump, because he is a man known to bluster. And he's also using this as a leverage to get China onto the negotiating table and listen to what the US says. So hopefully when you have and he's said that these tariffs will kick in Friday. That is after the negotiations in Washington on Wednesday. So hopefully this is just an attempt to arm twist China, and we will not see this happen. But till such time, it is a real threat, which is why we've seen global markets react the way they did today. And India is clearly part of the entire global economy, and we cannot hope to grow very well when the global economy is slowing down. So our fortunes are linked with the global economy. So as of now, not good news at all for anybody in the world, including India.
You know, I think Warren Buffett actually summed this up very well over the weekend when he said sometimes negotiators need to talk tough and even act half crazy to get results. You know, clearly the precursor to that big trade talk that is being scheduled between India and China. If I could now come to you, Pankaj Mohindru, you know, you've talked a lot about Make in India in the past. You've talked a lot about what Indian manufacturing can do, how this trade war should also be seen as an opportunity for the Indian economy, the Indian domestic manufacturers, and to also increase their exports. Did we, you think, miss the bus in 2018? And does this bring new opportunities for us in 2019? Or is there also a fear that because India cannot be isolated, we are going to be hurt?
You know, I'd like to clarify one thing, what Mr. Dua said and what the last speaker also said, that, you know, Mr. Trump is not bluster, it's very skillful, very clever negotiation. And there is a saying in Hindi ke dusre ki chita pe aap haath nahi sek sakte. You see, we cannot take this as a tactical opportunity. India is just about $300 billion of exports, and China is more than $2 trillion of exports. So we have to get deeply competitive, and, you know, the economy has to rise to that occasion. We are seeing those green shoots coming in, say, mobile phone manufacturing and electronics to some extent. And we see a very, very robust roadmap, but that is not because of China, that there is a spat between China and the US. The Indian economy, the Indian ecosystem, manufacturing ecosystem, has to have that bandwidth. We have to have the skill development. We've seen 268 factories coming in mobile phone manufacturing. We have saturated the domestic market as far as manufacturing is concerned. We have to step on to exports, but that is, you know, not going to be based on the spat between US and China. That is independent of that. Now, this GSP, withdrawal, I'm very happy that some very skillful and profound work is going on behind the curtains, and India has responded, without bluster, without that, false bravado, which sometimes was very typical of us and still continues to be there. So, I think we'll be able to push it forward, and the bilateral with the US is extremely important, because that's our largest market, and we have to be very, very skillful about how we negotiate with them.
In fact,
now coming to WTO, that WTO
in fact, Pankaj, that's a very important point. You made a very valid point. So, before we go back to talking to the WTO, Ambassador Shankar, look at the timing. Look at what, the kind of statements we've been getting from the United States the last couple of days. And you have the US Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross, in India. He arrives in India today. He's come with a large delegation. He's going to be interacting with Indian industrialists, Indian economy participants. He met with the Finance Minister, Arun Jaitley. He's met with Suresh Prabhu, the Commerce Minister. And from America's perspective, they have a lot of irritants that they like to talk about, whether it is India changing the level playing field of e-commerce after Walmart's mega acquisition of Flipkart, what we levy on Harley-Davidson here, what we levy on American dairy products. But the sheer timing that Wilbur Ross is in India at a time when the US-China trade rift is only getting bigger, should we read too much into it, or it's just a coincidence?
I think it probably will be a coincidence, but the timing is such because our election process is on that I don't think the government would be really in a position to do substantive negotiations at this stage, because till the election results are out, I don't know whether we have a system in place to really negotiate with political backing. So in that sense, it's not a very, what I would say, not very well chosen, the timing. But on the other hand, there are a large number of issues which have piled up from both sides. If from the Indian side we've been raising the whole H-1B visa issue, a totalization agreement, US phytosanitary requirements without much results, and indeed the whole H-1B process has become very unreliable, it's become more expensive, and there are many rejections. So it's become very, very difficult for our companies. And from the US side, there are issues about our changing e-commerce rules, medical, the kind of ceiling or prices fixed for medical appliances, and so on. So there are a range of issues, and it's good that the US has not imposed the withdrawal of GSP, which it had threatened, because really there is no government right now to negotiate. So whatever substantive
But Ambassador Shankar, if I could interject there, and request you to share your expertise from your diplomatic innings over here, the opportunities that will also come for India. So you have relations between US and China, which are clearly, getting worse. Relations between India and China, in this government, we have seen, for example, what has happened with Dokulam. We have tried to make our own stance. You have also relied on the United States when it comes to Pakistan, whether it is of tagging Masood Azhar as a global terrorist. It was also Donald Trump who, on a world arena in Korea, actually announced that there would be good news that would come in as far as Wing Commander Abhinandan goes. We can't look at all of these developments in isolation. So I would request you to share with us the opportunity that this trade war between US and China could bring for India and its foreign policy.
Well, I think that the opportunities really lie in terms of our building our domestic capabilities, because unless we become globally competitive in any particular sector, it's difficult to export. And while for some time US companies, which have been in China in fantastic strength, have been looking to hedge, not abandoning China, but creating alternative resource bases for production. Unfortunately, not much of that has come to India. Mostly it has gone to Vietnam, and in labor intensive industries it has gone to Vietnam, Bangladesh and Philippines. So India needs to do more about getting its ecosystem right for becoming competitive globally in manufacturing, and using also the huge domestic market that we have. But clearly what the rising US-China tensions and competition does show is that, the whole Asian scenario is going to see far more strategic competition between the two. And for India, which is seeking, which is very much
So, Maithili, that's a very
of the-
valid point. Maithili, that's such a valid point that Ambassador Shankar has made, that we need to boost our own manufacturing, we need to get more competitive, and at a time when the government takes so much to brag when it comes to the Make in India initiative. I don't know how much of that we managed to do in the last 5 years, and the data also speaks for itself. We're still primarily a services-driven economy. This doesn't augur well for the Indian economy. How can we ring fence ourselves as much as possible from all of this?
Well, there is no magic bullet, unfortunately. We have improved our position in the ease of doing business league tables, but it simply is not enough. We are nowhere near competitive as compared to countries like even Bangladesh, which has really overtaken India completely in the area of textile exports. So I think we have to do a great deal more. To improve ease of doing business, and also our exchange rate policy for a very long time didn't really help. The rupee had been strengthening a great deal, and that did not help at all, because if you remember, China became the trade powerhouse it is become, entirely driving on a low exchange rate. So that I think we have to get a whole lot of things put together. We need to improve our ease of doing business. The government policies have to be more supportive. Our FDI policies have to become easier as far as particularly things like e-commerce is concerned. At the same time, our exchange rate policy must also keep our Indian exports, the exchange rate, competitive. So a whole lot of work to be done in a whole lot of areas. So I don't think we will be able to benefit directly from the US-China trade wars. In fact, on the contrary, it is likely to hurt us rather than benefit us.
In fact, Maithili, if you look at the beneficiary list, in fact, if you look at the beneficiary list, we don't even feature in the top 5. This is according to the UNICTAD. The biggest beneficiaries are actually the EU, Mexico, and Japan. Ajay Dua, that doesn't speak very well for us. At one point we talk about how India is the fastest growing economy. It is, the shining star as being described also by the IMF and the World Bank. Then how is it that we can't even benefit from a trade war? If you could give 3 suggestions to your colleagues in the bureaucracy, what would it be?
1, do not please make any policy have retrospective effect. I am referring to the e-commerce changes in FDI policy with respect to e-commerce. Here is Amazon, which has invested huge amount of money in India. Walmart has made an investment of about $8 billion in Flipkart, with and estimating its enterprise value to be $19 billion. You suddenly bring a model to please, ostensibly to please the small traders who have been the supporters of a particular party in power before the elections, and make them applicable in 3 weeks' time. I think I understand the US Trade Secretary, Trade Representative had at that very moment, at the behest of such companies, taken up the matter with his counterpart in India. India didn't budge because there was some electoral gains to be made from it. So I would say that do things, certainly give enough time, but do not think small. What was it? What was the major change we made? Saying you can invest
from your sector,
bring in FDI in a trading platform, but not quite in
exactly, and that was $16 billion. It's the largest buyout by any firm in the e-commerce world. What Walmart did, which is America's largest company, Amazon, Jeff Bezos has made it clear what he makes of that entire situation as well. Pankaj Moindru, from your sector, for example, just see how Apple has, for example, been petitioning that they want to manufacture in India, whether it's CKD, SKD. I know we keep talking about that. Elon Musk tweets very often, has tweeted on this issue very often as well, how he would like to produce Teslas over here. So is India not also guilty of being protectionist?
Not protectionist. You see, what Mr. Dua said, I think the infringement of Press Note 3 was very blatant and a correction was required. But I remember old शेर from शकील बदायूं, मुझे खौफ आतिशे गुल से है कहीं वो चमन को जला न दे. We have serious fundamental issues, what Ambassador Shankar also spoke about, on ease of doing business and other things. But I think in this bilateral with the US, on every point which US is putting forward, there is going to be something on the table from us which will be sensible and skillful. And we are not going to have that chip on the shoulder approach and fritter away this opportunity. And I think there will be an extension, and we will be on the table and talk very carefully. I cannot specifically talk about a particular company, but we are cognizant about the fact that we want to produce 1 billion phones in India as per the national policy on electronics, valued at nearly $200 billion. And we are going to do that. If we are going to do that, which we have determined because the Prime Minister has declared that India will be the number one nation, then obviously Apple at $250 billion will have to be a major player. So we cannot ignore them. We will have to create policies which they find comfortable, which they find easy to work with. And this whole ease of doing business, I think that has really, I am particularly not convinced with that there has been a real quantum jump in improvement of ease of doing business.
Okay.
So there is a lot of work to be done on that.
Yeah, ease of doing business, to be fair, is also only based on 2 cities. It's only based on 2 cities. New Delhi and Mumbai doesn't come. We're running out of time. I'm just going to ask my producer, do we have time for a quick counter? No, we are completely out of time, Ajay Dua. My apologies to you, but this much is pretty clear. As Warren Buffett said, sometimes you have to act half crazy to get the work done. So let's see if that is exactly what Donald Trump is doing, threatening to increase tariffs on Friday. It's definitely going to have then an impact on the global economy, and India cannot be spared. I'd like to thank all my panelists for joining me on this edition of the India Development Debate. But stay tuned, we've got another debate lined up for you after this a break. In fact, we'll be back with Top 10 at 10. Many thanks for watching.